Opening, wherever you are in the world tonight, welcome. This is Sleepy Eastern Philosophy, coming to you from Japan. Tonight we explore a quiet question. Who are you when no one is watching? Not the version of you that exists online. Not the profile, the bio, the carefully chosen photograph. Not the carefully worded caption or the opinion you shared, because it represented your brand, or the one you held back because it didn't. Just you, in the dark, in the quiet, before the performance begins again, tomorrow morning. Find a comfortable position. Let the body settle into whatever is holding you. Let the shoulders drop a little. Let the jaw soften. Let the breath arrive at its own pace, without management, without adjustment, without the subtle effort of presenting even your breathing as something. Tonight we are going to put something down, not permanently. The world will ask you to pick it up again tomorrow, and you will, because that is what the world currently requires. But just for now, just for these hours, the performance can rest. You can just be. Block 1. The performance. Somewhere today, you managed your image, maybe consciously. Maybe without quite noticing. Perhaps it was a post considered longer than it needed to be, revised twice, adjusted for tone, posted, then checked again 10 minutes later to see how it was landing. Perhaps it was a message rewritten before sending, because the first version revealed too much or sounded too uncertain, or did not quite match the professional version of yourself you are currently trying to embody. Perhaps it was a thought you had and almost shared, and then decided against, because it did not fit the narrative, because it might confuse people, because it was not quite on brand. These are small things, each one barely worth noticing on its own. But together, across a full day, they constitute something real. A sustained, low-level effort. A continuous background monitoring of the self. How am I coming across? Is this consistent with how I want to be seen? What does this say about my brand? Will this resonate with the audience I am trying to build? We have been told by books, by courses, by coaches, by the entire architecture of social media platforms, designed to make self-presentation feel like self-expression, that we are each a brand, that our careers, our reputations, our futures depend on how we present ourselves. That visibility is the currency of the age. That the person who is not actively managing their image is falling behind the person who is. Build your audience. Stay consistent. Show up every day. Be authentic. But strategically authentic. Authentic in the ways that perform. Authentic in the ways that grow the numbers. And so we perform. Constantly. Tirelessly. With a level of sustained effort that we rarely acknowledge as effort, because it has become so woven into the fabric of the day that we have genuinely forgotten what it felt like before we had a brand to maintain. The gap between who we are and who we present ourselves to be, widens slowly, almost imperceptibly, so slowly that we barely notice, until one day we lie in bed in the dark and realize we are not quite sure which one is real, the brand or the person underneath it. Tonight, we visit a philosopher who lived 2,500 years ago in a world that had never heard of social media and who understood this particular exhaustion with remarkable precision. Block 2: A World Coming Apart. Confucius was born in 551 BCE in the state of Lu, in what is now the Shandong province of northeastern China. He was born into a world that was coming apart. The Zhou dynasty, which had governed China for centuries, was losing its grip. Regional lords competed for territory and power. The elaborate system of rituals and relationships that had structured society for generations was being abandoned, corrupted, or simply ignored by those who found it inconvenient. The strong preyed on the weak. Loyalty was transactional. The people in positions of greatest authority were often the least qualified to be there. People did not know who to trust. The old maps no longer matched the territory. The values that had oriented them no longer seemed to be held by those in power. Into this disorder, Confucius devoted his life to a question that sounds almost naive in its simplicity. How should a person live? Not how should a state be organized. Not which military strategy will bring victory. Not what economic arrangement will produce the most wealth. How should a person, one human being, move through the world? His answer was not a system or a set of laws or an ideology to be imposed from above. It was a vision of relationship between parent and child, between teacher and student, between ruler and subject, between friend and friend. The good society, Confucius believed, could not be engineered from the top down. It had to grow from the inside out, from the quality of each individual person, expressed in the quality of each relationship, rippling outward into the quality of the community, and from there into the quality of civilization itself. The person was the foundation, not the law, not the institution, not the brand, the actual person, their actual character, the virtue they carried and expressed in every ordinary interaction of every ordinary day. And the great question of his life was not how to appear good. It was how to actually become good, how to cultivate slowly and honestly the kind of character that needed no management. That simply was. It is worth pausing on how strange this question sounds in our age. We live in a moment when the tools for appearing good have never been more sophisticated. We can craft the narrative. We can choose the photograph. We can time the post for maximum resonance and edit the caption until it sounds exactly like the right kind of authentic. And Confucius, looking at all of this from across the centuries, would ask a single question. But who are you underneath all of that? Not the presentation, not the strategy, not the version that performs well, the person. The actual, private, unmanaged person. What is their character like? What do they do when no one is watching? What do they value when there is no one to perform the valuing for? That, he would say, is the only question that matters. Everything else is decoration. Block 3. De. The quality that cannot be performed. The central concept in Confucian thought is de, virtue. But de is not virtue in the sense most familiar to Western ears. It is not a checklist of approved behaviors. It is not the performance of goodness for an external judge. It is not even quite about doing the right thing. In any legalistic sense, de is closer to what we might call presence or gravity, a quality of being that radiates outward from a person. Without effort and without design. Think of someone in your life whose presence simply changes the quality of a room. Not because they are loud or dominant or commanding, but because there is something in the quality of their attention, something in their consistency, the unmistakable sense that they are the same person. In every context you have ever encountered them, that makes trust feel not just possible, but inevitable. That quality is something like de. The person of de does not need to tell you they are trustworthy. You feel it. The person of de does not need to announce their competence. It is evident in how they inhabit a problem. The person of de does not need to manage their reputation, because their reputation takes care of itself as the inevitable consequence of who they actually are. This is where de and personal branding diverge most sharply. Personal branding begins with a question directed outward. How do I want to be perceived? What narrative will resonate with my audience? What should I post to communicate my value? De begins with a question directed inward. Who am I actually becoming? What quality of attention am I cultivating? Am I the same person when no one is watching? These are not the same project. One is the construction of an image. The other is the cultivation of a self. One requires continuous maintenance. The other, if pursued honestly, eventually begins to sustain itself. Because genuine character, truly cultivated, becomes a kind of gravity. People feel it. They are drawn to it. They trust it. Not because it was designed to be trustworthy, but because it actually is. And the deepest irony of the personal branding age is that the thing people are trying to construct through strategy, genuine authority, genuine trust, genuine influence, cannot be constructed. It can only be grown, slowly, in the dark, without an audience, through the patient cultivation of actual character. There is a further irony worth sitting with. The more you orient yourself toward being perceived as trustworthy, the less able you become to actually be trustworthy, Because the orientation toward perception pulls your attention outward toward the audience, away from the inner work. That would make the trustworthiness real. It is the same dynamic that makes performed happiness less satisfying than actual happiness. The performance consumes the space in which the real thing could grow. They asks you to stop worrying about how you are perceived and start caring about who you are becoming. Not because reputation is unimportant, but because reputation, genuine reputation, is always the consequence of character, never its cause. You cannot build a day by trying to appear to have day. You can only build it by doing the actual work, quietly, consistently, privately, whether anyone is watching or not. Block 4. Li, the practice that nobody sees. Another central concept in Confucian thought is Li. Li, ritual, propriety, the right way of doing things. Li is perhaps the most misunderstood concept in Confucianism, particularly for modern Western readers. Ritual sounds like performance. Propriety sounds like conformity. The right way of doing things sounds like suppression of individuality and authentic expression. But Confucius meant something subtler and more interesting. Li was the recognition that form and content are not opposites, that how you do something shapes what you become, that the quality of attention you bring to small gestures over time cultivates the quality of attention you bring to large ones. That outer practice and inner character are not separate things, but different aspects of the same continuous process of becoming a person. The way you greet someone at the beginning of the day, not as a performance for anyone watching, not as a social obligation to be discharged, but as a genuine acknowledgement that this person exists, that their presence today matters, that this small moment of contact is worth being present for. The way you listen when someone is speaking to you, not formulating your response while they are still finding their words, not categorizing their experience into boxes you have already prepared, but actually receiving what they are saying, allowing it to land, letting it change something in you if it needs to. The care you bring to work that will never be praised. The task completed well when no audience is present. The small integrity maintained in decisions that will never appear on any profile. The crucial distinction Confucius drew is this: Li is practiced whether or not anyone is watching. In fact, that is precisely the point. The practice performed for an audience is not Li, it is theater. Li is the practice that happens in the absence of observers, that shapes the person you are becoming, regardless of whether that becoming is visible to anyone. The person who brings genuine attention to their work, whether praised or unnoticed, gradually becomes a person of genuine attention. The person who performs attention when it is strategically useful and withdraws it when it is not, becomes a person whose attention cannot be trusted. People know the difference, not always immediately, not always consciously, but over time it becomes undeniable. We know when we are being met and when we are being managed. We know when the warmth is real and when it is calibrated. Li is the practice of genuine meeting, unglamorous, unobserved, daily, and, in the long run, the only practice that builds something real. Block 5. The particular tiredness. Let me say something that perhaps does not need to be said, because you already know it. You know it somewhere in the body. The sustained management of how you are perceived is exhausting, in a way that is different from other exhaustions. The tiredness of hard, genuine work is clean. You spent yourself on something real. The body is tired, but the mind has the particular satisfaction of having been genuinely present. You were there. You did something. The work exists in you as something you actually lived. The tiredness of sustained self-management is different. It is a tiredness that does not quite feel like tiredness. It feels more like depletion, like something being slowly drawn out of you that you cannot quite name or locate. You have been somewhere all day, very busy, very visible, very productive. You produced things, responded to things, presented yourself skillfully and consistently. By external measures, it was a successful day. And yet, you lie in the dark and feel strangely absent from yourself, as if the self that spent all day being projected outward left something essential behind, as if the continuous act of translating yourself for an audience created a gap between you and your own experience that you did not notice widening, until suddenly it is wide enough to feel. Confucius described something like this gap in his discussion of the village worthy, a concept he considered deeply troubling. The village worthy is the person who appears virtuous to everyone around them, who says the right things, performs the right gestures, never does anything obviously wrong, respectable, consistent, widely approved of, but whose inner life does not match the outer presentation, who has learned to simulate virtue without cultivating it, who has become so skilled at the performance that they can no longer quite distinguish it from the real thing. Confucius considered this one of the most dangerous conditions a person could inhabit, not because the person is malicious, but because they have lost contact with themselves. The image has become the substance. The performance has displaced the person. The question tonight is not whether you are performing. We all do, in some contexts. The question is whether you can still find yourself underneath the performance. Whether there is still someone home when the presenting is done for the day. If the answer is yes, then the performance is a tool, useful when it is needed, held lightly, set down when the day is over. If the answer is becoming harder to give, if you lie in the dark and genuinely cannot tell. Where the brand ends and the person begins. That is not a crisis. It is information. It is the nervous system saying, the tool has become too heavy. The management has become too continuous. You need some unmanaged time, some unobserved hours, some space in which to simply be, without that background process running. Tonight is that space. These hours are unmanaged. No one is watching. No one is evaluating. You can be exactly as confused and tired and uncertain as you actually are. You do not need to present the coherent version of yourself tonight. The incoherent version, the uncertain version, the version that does not know quite how to answer the question yet. That version is welcome here. That version is the real one. Block 6. Ren, being fully human together. The deepest concept in Confucian thought is Ren. Ren, humaneness, benevolence. The quality of being fully human in genuine relationship with others. Confucius struggled throughout his life to define Ren precisely. When different students asked him what it meant, he gave them different answers. Not because he was inconsistent or evasive, but because Ren cannot be captured in a definition. It is not a concept to be understood intellectually. It is a quality to be lived, to be practiced imperfectly in each specific relationship, each specific encounter, each specific moment of genuine contact with another human being. What we can say is this: Ren is what is present when two people are genuinely meeting, not transacting, not networking, not performing warmth or connection for an audience watching, but actually present to each other. When the teacher truly sees the student, not the student's grade or future potential or useful qualities, but the actual person in front of them with their actual confusion and their actual effort and their actual desire to understand something difficult. When the friend truly listens, not waiting for a pause to offer advice, not internally composing a response while you are still speaking, but actually with you, letting your experience be as strange and specific as it actually is, without rushing to normalize or resolve it. When the leader genuinely considers the effect of their decisions on the people in their care, not as a stakeholder management exercise, not as a public relations calculation, but as a real reckoning with the fact that every person affected is a full human life, irreducible to a head count or a metric or a line in a report. Ren is what happens when the transaction stops and the person becomes visible. And this is where the culture of personal branding creates its deepest problem. Because when we relate to others primarily as audience, when we see the people around us first as networks and contacts and followers, when every relationship is filtered through the question of what this person means for how I am perceived, we have made it structurally difficult to see them, to actually see them as people, with their own inner lives, their own fears and hopes, their own version of lying in the dark at night, wondering who they actually are. Ren is not possible at that distance. It requires presence, not the performance of presence. Actual presence, the willingness to be changed by what you encounter in another person. This is harder than it sounds. And it is harder than building a personal brand. Building a brand requires skill and consistency and a strategic thinking, all of which you may genuinely have. But Ren requires something different. It requires vulnerability, the willingness to actually be affected, to let what matters to another person actually matter to you, to stop managing the encounter, and simply be in it. This is the deepest practice Confucius taught. Not the ritual, not the virtue, not the rectification of names, but this, the willingness to actually see another person, to be with them in their actual experience, rather than the version of their experience. That is useful for your brand. There is something quietly radical about this in the current moment. In an age that has monetized attention, genuine presence, presence that asks for nothing, that does not convert the encounter into content, that simply meets another person where they are, has become a rare and valuable thing. The person who can offer it has something that no algorithm can replicate, that no brand strategy can manufacture, that no amount of optimization can produce. They have Ren. And Ren, in the end, is what people are actually hungry for. Block 7. The Quiet Influence. There is a story about Confucius that I find myself returning to. For much of his adult life, Confucius traveled from state to state, seeking a ruler who would give him a position of real authority and allow him to put his ideas into practice. He was largely unsuccessful. He was given some positions, briefly, in various states. He offered counsel. He was thanked and dismissed. He returned home. He taught. He compiled the ancient texts and wrote and thought. He died at 72, without having achieved the political transformation he had spent his life working toward. By conventional measures, he did not make it. No significant political position, no empire transformed, no legacy secured during his lifetime. And yet, here we are, 2,500 years later, in a world that has been shaped by his thinking, more profoundly than by almost any ruler who rejected him. His ideas became the foundation of the Chinese civil service examination, shaping governance for 2 millennia. They spread across Korea, Japan, Vietnam, influencing the most fundamental assumptions of entire civilizations. About how people should relate to each other, hundreds of millions of people have lived in societies whose deepest values trace back, in some form, to a man who never managed his image, never optimized for an audience, never built a brand in any strategic sense. He just taught. He thought carefully and honestly. He lived according to his principles even when it cost him professionally. He formed real relationships with his students, and his students formed real relationships with their students, and something real moved through those relationships, generation after generation, because it was rooted in something real. This is the nature of the. It moves slowly. It does not trend. It cannot be engineered or accelerated. But it accumulates. And in the long run, it is the only influence that actually lasts. The personal brand has a lifespan. The character outlives the brand. There is something quietly comforting in this, if you allow yourself to feel it. You do not need to go viral. You do not need to build a large audience. You do not need to position yourself correctly, or manage your narrative skillfully, or stay visible enough to remain relevant. What you need is to become someone real, someone whose character is actually worth having, someone whose presence leaves the people around them a little more seen, a little more understood, a little more willing to be honest than they were before you arrived. That is not a brand strategy. It is a way of being in the world. It moves slowly. It does not generate notifications. It will not show up in your analytics. But in the long run that Confucius was always thinking about, the 2,000-year run, the run that outlasts any particular platform or algorithm. It is the only thing that actually matters. Tonight, let that be enough. Block 8. Who are you when no one is watching? Let us return to the question we began with. Who are you when no one is watching? This is not a rhetorical question. It is the central question of the Confucian tradition. And it is one of the most practically important questions you can ask yourself. Because the person you are, when no one is watching, is the person you are actually becoming. The habits you maintain in private become your character. The attention you bring to unobserved moments trains the attention you bring to observed ones. The integrity you keep when it costs you something is the integrity that will hold when you need it most. The person who is generous when there is an audience and indifferent when there is not becoming a generous person. They are becoming a person who performs generosity. The person who does careful work, whether praised or ignored, is becoming careful, not performing carefulness, inhabiting it. This is the slow, unglamorous, invisible work that the Confucian tradition insists is the only work that ultimately matters. Not the content, the character, not the image, the person, not the brand, the actual human being who shows up the same way in every context. Because there is something real at the center that does not require an audience to exist. Who are you when no one is watching? Not as a standard to be measured against, not as a new source of anxiety or self-improvement pressure, but as an honest orientation, a direction, a question to carry lightly, the way you might carry a compass, not checking it constantly, but knowing it is there, and letting it quietly inform the small choices of ordinary days, the analects, the collected sayings of Confucius recorded by his students, contain a moment that I find unexpectedly moving. A student asks Confucius, "Is there one word that could serve as a guide for one's entire life?" Confucius says, "Is it not shu? Reciprocity? Do not impose on others what you yourself do not want." One word, not a brand strategy, not a personal development framework, not a system or a methodology or a philosophy of success. One word, about how to treat other people, about the simple demanding practice of imagining yourself in someone else's position. Before you act, this is what the good life looks like in Confucian thought. Not impressive, not viral, not optimized, just genuinely considerate, genuinely present, genuinely there for the people in front of you. That is the person worth becoming. That is the question worth sleeping on. Block 9. Character over content. There is a concept in the Confucian tradition that does not translate well into English. Junzi, the exemplary person. The Yunzi is the ideal Confucius spent his life trying to describe and to cultivate. Not a saint, not a hero, not someone of extraordinary gifts or unusual circumstances. An ordinary person who has committed to the ongoing, imperfect, persistent work of becoming genuinely good, not appearing good, not being perceived as good, but actually, slowly, through long practice, becoming someone whose character is genuinely worth encountering. Confucius contrasted this with what he called the petty person. Not a villain, not someone obviously corrupt, but someone whose primary orientation is toward a personal advantage. Who asks first, "What is in this for me?" Who performs virtue when it is beneficial and abandons it when it is not? Who relates to others through the lens of utility? The petty person might be very successful by conventional measures. Large audience, impressive brand, wide name recognition, but their influence is hollow at its core. Because it is not rooted in anything real, it is rooted in calculation. And calculation, as a foundation, does not hold under the kind of pressure that eventually comes to every life. The content you produce from genuine understanding is different from content produced for performance. You can feel the difference. There is a quality in the work of a person who has actually thought something through, who genuinely cares about what they are saying, who would say it even if the numbers went down. That quality accumulates over time. It cannot be replicated by strategy. It can only be grown slowly through the actual cultivation of genuine understanding and genuine care. Not, "What should I produce?" but, "What do I actually understand? What do I genuinely care about? What am I willing to stand behind, whether or not it performs well?" Those are the questions worth spending time with. There is a practice implied in this. Before you create something, before you write the post or record the video or send the message. Ask not, will this perform well? Ask, do I actually believe this? Have I thought it through carefully enough to stand behind it tomorrow and next month and in 5 years when the context has shifted? Is this something I would say if the numbers were not a factor? Most of the time, the honest answers to these questions lead to better work anyway. Not always, not immediately. The algorithm does not always reward depth, but over time, the work that comes from genuine engagement accumulates something that strategic work cannot replicate. A body of thinking that is coherent, a voice that is unmistakably yours, a reputation that does not require maintenance, because it is not constructed. It is simply what you have actually been over a long period of time, doing work that you actually believed in. That is the content worth making. That is the character worth cultivating. Block 10. The Unbranded Life. I want to be honest here. I am not suggesting you delete your accounts, or abandon strategic communication, or pretend that visibility does not matter. In the world we actually have to navigate, it does matter. The world has its requirements. Meeting them is not a betrayal of virtue. What I am suggesting is an inner reorientation, that you hold the brand lightly, that you remember, especially in the moments when the managing becomes exhausting, that the brand is a tool and not an identity. That the version of you that lives in other people's perceptions is a representation of a person, not the person themselves. The map is not the territory, the profile is not the self, and the self, the actual, particular, irreplaceable human being, who is lying in the dark right now, deserves more of your careful attention than the representation does. The cultivation of genuine character is slow. It is unglamorous. It generates no content. It cannot be posted or optimized or measured. But it is the only work that produces a person who is genuinely worth knowing. Not a person whose numbers are impressive. Not a person whose brand is well managed. A person who is real, whose presence is there, who changes the quality of a room simply by being in it, who listens in a way that makes people feel actually seen, who brings the same quality of attention to unobserved moments as to observed ones, whose character does not require maintenance because it is not performed. It is simply there. This is what the Confucian tradition calls the unbranded life, available to anyone willing to do the slow, quiet, invisible work of becoming genuinely themselves. There is a relief available in this framing. If you have been exhausted by the performance, if you have spent years constructing and maintaining an image, and found yourself at the end of a long day, not quite sure where the brand ends and the person begins, there is a relief available in remembering that the real work is not the performance. The real work is quieter. It happens in private. It does not require an audience. It does not generate content. It simply requires you to show up honestly and consistently to the actual life you are actually living. To be present in your actual relationships. To care about your actual work. To maintain your integrity in the actual small moments that make up the actual fabric of a day. None of this is glamorous. None of it goes viral. But it is the work that produces a person who is genuinely worth knowing, who can look back at the end of a long life and recognize themselves, who did not trade the real thing for the representation. That is enough. It is more than enough. Tonight, let it be enough. Block 11. Zheng Ming. Calling things by their right names. Confucius believed that one of the foundations of a good life was something he called Zheng Ming. Zheng Ming. The rectification of names. To call things by their right names. To resist the drift of language. Toward what is convenient or strategic or comfortable, rather than what is actually true. If you call the performance authenticity, you lose the ability to tell them apart. If you call strategic warmth genuine connection, you lose access to the real thing. If you call brand management self-expression, you lose track of the difference between who you are projecting and who you actually are. So a small rectification. The personal brand is not you. It is a representation of you. Useful in certain contexts. Requiring maintenance. But separate from the person it represents. The audience is not a community. It is a group of people who have chosen, for various reasons, to pay you some attention. That is real. It matters. But being watched is not the same as being known. Having followers is not the same as having friends. Being seen is not the same as being understood. The performance of values is not the same as having them. Consistency of image is not the same as integration of self. Optimized authenticity is not the same as being actually honest. These distinctions are not meant to judge or accuse. They are meant to help you locate yourself, to find your way back to the thing that is actually real, which is not the profile, not the metrics, not the audience. You, the person underneath the presentation. The one who existed before the brand was built. The one who will still be there long after it. That person is worth tending to tonight. There is a practice available in Zheng Ming. When you feel the tiredness of performance, when you notice the gap between the brand and the person, instead of either collapsing into shame or pushing through with more performance, try this. Just name it. I am performing right now. I am managing how I am being perceived. I am not quite sure which version of me is speaking. Not as a criticism, not as a failure to be corrected, but simply as an honest naming of what is actually happening. Zheng Ming is not about achieving perfect authenticity. It is about maintaining contact with reality. About not losing track entirely of the difference between the map and the territory, the brand and the person. As long as you can name it, you have not lost yourself. The gap between the performance and the person is just a gap. It is not permanent. You can always choose, in any moment, to step out of the performance and simply be, even if just for the duration of a breath, even if just for the hours between now and morning, even if just for this. Block 12. Rest from the performance. Tonight, I want to give you something simple. Permission to stop, not permanently. Tomorrow, you will begin again. The world will ask for the performance, and you will provide it, because you are skilled at it, and because you have built something real through that sustained effort, and because showing up matters. But tonight, just for these hours, you can put it down. You do not need to be the version of yourself that exists in anyone else's perception right now. You do not need to be consistent with the image. You do not need to monitor how this silence is landing, what this rest says about you, whether stepping back will cost you something. No one is watching. You are a human being in the dark, breathing, tired from a long day of being seen, from the particular tiredness of presenting, the most coherent and the most strategic and the most brand appropriate version of yourself to a world that is always, in some sense, an audience. Let that go now. Let the face soften completely, the shoulders, the hands, the quiet vigilance that runs in the background of every public day, always partly checking how you are being received. Let it all soften. You are not performing right now. You are not being evaluated. You are not on. You are just here. In this particular body, in this particular darkness, in this particular moment. That does not require anything from you. The breath arriving without your management, the heart beating without your instruction, the body doing all of it perfectly, without presentation, without the need to be anything other than exactly what it is. There is wisdom in this. The body does not perform. The breath does not brand itself. The heartbeat does not optimize for an audience. These functions simply are. They do what they do, because that is what they actually are, not because anyone is watching. And for just a few minutes, you can let the rest of you be the same way. Not performing, not presenting, not managing how you are received, just being. The way the breath just is. The way the body just is. The way the dark is simply dark, without needing to be anything more or less than that. Let this be a practice, not of emptying yourself, but of returning to yourself, the actual self, the one that exists before and after the performance, the one that is yours, regardless of what anyone else thinks of it. That one, just here, just now. Block 13. Return, just be. Confucius spent his life asking one question. Not how to be seen, not how to leave a legacy, or build an audience or manage a reputation, but how to be genuinely good. How to be, in the full sense of the word, a human being, the Yunzi, the exemplary person, not perfect, not without failure or confusion or doubt, but oriented towards something real, committed to the slow, daily, unglamorous work of becoming someone whose character is worth having. That project does not require an audience. It requires only the willingness to ask the uncomfortable questions honestly. Who am I when no one is watching? Is the person I am privately the person I am claiming to be publicly? Am I cultivating something real or maintaining something performed? Carry those questions lightly tonight, not as pressure, not as judgment, as a compass. And tonight, you can simply rest. You are not your brand. You are not your profile. You are not the version of yourself that exists in other people's perceptions. You are a human being with a particular history, a particular way of seeing, a particular quality of care and attention that is entirely and irreducibly yours. No one else brings your exact presence to what you pay attention to. No one else inhabits your specific life, with your specific history and your specific way of being in the world. That is not a brand. That is a gift.
One that requires not marketing, but cultivation.
Not performance, but presence. Not management, but the patient, honest, ongoing work of simply being who you actually are. And tonight, you can practice it. Right here, in this dark, in this quiet, in this moment that requires nothing from you except your presence. Not your performance, not your strategy, not the best version of yourself, just you. Actually here, actually present, actually breathing, the breath arriving, the body resting, the mind growing quieter, settling slowly towards sleep, the day loosening its grip, the performance finally, fully put down. And underneath it all, underneath the brand and the profile and the audience and the metrics, the person, still there, always there. The only one who was ever really there. Just be. The performance can wait until morning. Tonight, just this. Just the breath. Just the body resting. Just the quiet that has been here all along. Underneath all the presenting and managing and maintaining. Waiting patiently for you to come back to it. You are home. Sleep well.